this is part of the Meow series. This is the very last in our series. It was sponsored by the City of Pasadena Cultural Affairs Commission. So we got a grant to do dance education for the community. So all these events have been free, and our last event today for Speaking of Dance is, I'm really happy to have John Clifford here. He has an incredible history in Los Angeles and in the dance world as well. So I've asked him to come and speak about a little bit about himself, show some videos, and this forum can be any way he wants it to be today. So there's no kind of way of going. You can chat. So it's up to you. You can shape it. And but your history and your information is what I'm after.
Okay, well,
I want to hear that.
I want to hear that. And a couple of really good stories that nobody else would hear. Some juicy.
You better get the wine.
Some juicy stuff. I'll open the white wine.
I think is that too bright for you? I can turn that down. I don't know. That's good.
It looks. How's that on tape? Good.
Good.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that was an not an all right.
Well, it's just orange.
What, orange?
No, it's amber. Go ahead, John. Good.
So I guess I'm going to hope that you ask a lot of questions to spur me on. But as John said, well, actually he didn't say, but I was born in Los Angeles. I'll give you a quick bio. I was born in Los Angeles. My parents were in show business in Earl Carroll's Vanities. You know what that was? That was like the last bastion of vaudeville. And they had the original theater at Sunset and Vine, which is now, I think, Nickelodeon. But that was originally the Earl Carroll Vanities Theater. And it was a nightclub variety show. And then they changed it into the Moulin Rouge. It was known as the Moulin Rouge for many years, a big Hollywood night spot. And then, I can't remember, something came in between. And then I think now it's the Nickelodeon Theater.
Yeah.
It's
still Nickelodeon, yeah.
Nickelodeon. But that's where I first was on stage. When I was like 2 years old, I was in my father's acrobatic act. So I started young. And Balanchine, I will talk a lot about Balanchine because he really was more my father than my father. My mother had 6 husbands, so she went through them pretty fast.
Wow.
Another story about my dad later. But my dad was part of a 2-man acrobatic act. I guess they call it a male adagio act. Very Cirque du Soleil-ish, in today's terms. And one guy did the lifting, the other one did flips and things. And I was in that when I was 2 years old. My dad got me on stage, and on my Facebook I actually posted photographs of me standing in my dad's hands, like when I'm 2, things like that. And my mother was in the show as the class act singer. She sang light opera, and I think she went into that show when she was like 18, so she was very young. And my dad was 44, and my mother was 20 when they married. So it sort of was like a reverse cougar. And her singing career pretty much stopped. She did sing a bit, but they divorced, so I was sort of shuttled off to military boarding schools, which I'm very thankful for now because it's the only thing that gave me any discipline at all. So, but I didn't. I always danced. I was in, like I said, I was in show business at 2, so I was used to the theater and I was used to showgirls. And I remember one of my earliest memories is in the orchestra pit, pretending to conduct the orchestra, and looking up and seeing all the showgirls in their nylons and their neck tights and high heels and all. So I was just sort of born into the theater, so it's the most natural thing for me to go into it. And I always danced. I remember always hyperkinetic, moving around dancing to music. I didn't have any choice. My mother didn't really want me to go into show business. She wanted me to be a lawyer because I argued all the time. She thought you should be a lawyer. But anyway, I started training in Los Angeles at 9 years old with a very influential teacher in those days named Catherine Arquette Etienne. And she was part of this very large family called the Charisse family. And Nico Charisse was the first husband of Sid Charisse. Actually, Sid Charisse was born in Texas. I think her last name is Finklia. But she married Nico, and the siblings, there were 11 children that used to tour Europe with their parents when they used to have ballet on vaudeville. So they were the Charisse family of ballet dancers. But they did flamenco, they did all kinds of stuff, but ballet predominantly. And I was lucky to start with Katie Etienne. She was also Mitzi Gaynor's teacher, so she was used to teaching kind of Hollywood people. And I got private classes from her sister, Marie Charisse. But my focus was going to be going into Broadway and being a singer, dancer, actor kind of thing, because I also acted. I was on television as an actor when I was very young, and Death Valley Days with Ronald Reagan and different people. Day in Court show. I was on the early version of Judge Judy, kind of. I was in Day in Court a lot. Donna Reed show. Anyway, but I'm trying to go as fast as possible. But in those days, so let's say around 1957-ish, I started around 1956. I was actually on TV when I was 11 on the Dinah Shore show twice. When I was 11, dancing classical pas de deux with a little girl named Susie Copito, who in the movie of Gypsy is Baby June. But she changed her name to Morgan Brittany and became a pretty well-known actress on Dallas and a few other things. And my first experience really with ballet, classical ballet, the big, was the New York City Ballet when they came out to do Nutcracker at the Greek Theater. And I was chosen to do the Nutcracker-Prince. And, you know, I was thrilled, terrified, really. But Balanchine, I remember even then, was a very unique force. He was very calm, he was very kind, he was in complete command, but not the least bit autocratic, not the least bit what you'd expect from a Russian European genius ballet master. I mean, he was complete. And I remember once in a rehearsal, the first stage rehearsal, I was taught the role by the ballet mistress, Janet Reed, who had been one of his well-known ballerinas. But then he took over for stage rehearsals, and in the Prince's pantomime, you're supposed to walk stage right and gesture to stage left. And I guess I turned my back too far to the front, and Balanchine said, "No, dear, I know that girl up there is very pretty, but you have to show the audience what you're doing." And then another time in the stage rehearsal as the Nutcracker, when you're the Nutcracker, you have to run and jump on the Mouse King's back. And I was, I was very enthusiastic, so I jumped over him actually, and I grabbed him around the neck and almost killed the poor guy because I was supposed to land on his back, but I just overdid it. So I jumped, grabbed him by the neck, we both went rolling, everybody in the company cracked up, and Balanchine went, "You don't have to jump so high, but good." And that was the first time I met George Balanchine. And the performances were mind-blowing. The Sugar Plum Fairy was the original Maria Tallchief with Nikki Maglianis. And since I was the Prince, I got to sit on the throne in the back so I could watch every performance. And the alternate Sugar Plum Fairy was, I think she was 19, Allegra Kent, who's also from Los Angeles. There were a lot of great dancers who came from this town. And she alternated with Maria Tallchief as the Sugar Plum. And she also did the Dewdrop. Are you familiar with the Balanchine Nutcracker at all? The Dewdrop is a really difficult principal role. She did the Dewdrop alternating with a very young Violette Verdi. And Violette was, now that I look back at it, Violette was, I think, in her first year with the company. And she was French trained, but Balanchine adored her. And Violette had to jump like today, a Sipova. She jumped like incredible. I couldn't believe the height she got. And she was very sweet and very lively. So it was a very good first introduction, to classical ballet to have that experience. It was amazing. And then I did a lot of TV shows. I then went to what was probably the most well-rounded, biggest dance school, American School of Dance, which was run by Eugene Loring. And Eugene Loring was the choreographer of Billy the Kid. And he hated Balanchine. I'll get into that later. But they were rivals in the 1930s for a minute, but they were rivals. And Loring had a very big school on Hollywood Boulevard, just a few blocks, 2 blocks east of La Brea, at the bottom of this big old hotel. Were you around for that?
No, but I'm just recalling some history about that.
Yeah, and it had 2 big studios downstairs underneath the hotel, and it was kind of the place in those days. LA has always had, not so much now, but it used to have a really large group of Russian immigrant teachers. Bronislava Nijinsky taught here, Slavinska taught here. One of my other teachers was Maria Bekefi, who was not well known, but a brilliant teacher. Carmelita Marachi, I studied with all of them. But
the two brothers in Hollywood.
Panayev, Kozlovs,
Yeah.
Who else? I didn't study with Panaya for the Kozlovs,
Okay.
but Carmelita Marachi was very influential. She taught Cynthia Gregory, Allegra Kent. By the time I got to her, I was about 14 or 15, and she was very old. And she would give long lectures about Beethoven, about music, in the middle of the bar. And then she'd go off on a tangent, but it was brilliant. And then she would give exercises at the bar, like closing your eyes, doing frappes, and balancing with your eyes closed, which is, try it. I mean, my God. And then doing frappes, snapping your fingers in syncopation with the frappe. So it builds a kind of a center strength. And if you look at Cynthia Gregory, there are videos of her, or if you've seen her live, or Allegra Kent, their placement and their backs are so strong. They have a center like I've never seen, and that comes from that. I swear it comes from Carmelita. And I have a really good balance. I don't mean to brag, but I have a very good sense of balance. And I think that also came from my father standing on my head in his hand when I was a child, I mean, obviously. But it also came, I think, from Carmelita Marachi's training. And when I teach on a regular basis, I'll give stuff from Carmelita just because it really shakes people up. But she's a genius, and I happen to know, just by chance, the woman that made all of her costumes, because Carmelita used to have a small touring group. And she was one of the first major female choreographers. You should really look up her history. It's quite fascinating. And she was in an American Ballet Theater. She was a ballerina, but not well known, but she was on her way to become. But she was very temperamental, very egocentric, an indomitable will, and she wanted to choreograph. And in those days, you know, except for Agnes and Mill, there wasn't much you could do. So Carmelita left ABT, came to Los Angeles, started her own touring group out of LA, and got rave reviews everywhere she went, including the New York Times. John Martin went crazy for her because she would choreograph everything, dance on point shoes. Her core would, she had like a small group, 4 to 6 people. They would do something. She would come back out in character shoes and do a flamenco number with castanets. And then she'd go back and change and come back. So it was quite an interesting woman. And I read all these reviews that her wardrobe costume designer had kept. Because I took class from her, but I didn't know for how many years she was so influential. You know, so she was a really strong influence in Los Angeles. But anyway, so I studied with Loring, and I studied with Carmelita, and I studied with Maria Bicchefi, again, who was a very incredible teacher from the Ballet Russe period. Also doing television shows, acting, and then I became a regular dancer on the Danny Kaye Show when I was 18. Then I went to New York because I thought I was going to go on Broadway. That was kind of my career trajectory, except that Anton Dolan came to town. Well, first, chronologically, I did go to New York. I had made some money on the Danny Kaye Show, so I knew I could go and live off that money for a little while. And I took class at the Joffrey School. I took class at ABT School with Leon Danilian and Perry Slavik, who was a very influential Russian teacher in New York in those years, and at Balanchine, School of American Ballet. And, you know, not to be falsely humble or falsely conceited, I was one of the better boys at the Joffrey School and the ABT School. But at the SAB School, School of American Ballet, I sucked. I was really like, wait a minute, I'm nowhere up to this level. It was really an eye-opener. So of course I loved it because it was a challenge. So I was paying for classes. I didn't think to ask. And then my money ran out. So I went up to Diana Adams, who was the head of the school in those days. Very severe. She always wore black. She was very tall, never cracked a smile. Really intimidating. But I went up to her when my money ran out, and I said, is there any way I could get a scholarship or free classes? And she looked down at me and she goes, well, of course, John, you have one when you want it. We were wondering when you were going to ask. And, you know, and I was wearing braces at the time, and I was eating an apple, and I was, oh, thank you, and I spit a piece of apple. And she was, you know, I was like really embarrassed, but she was gracious. So I studied at school a few months, and then I just couldn't survive anymore on money, and I didn't want to be a waiter, and I'd always been a professional performer. And so I went back to Los Angeles and joined what was then supposedly LA's great hope to have a classical ballet company. So we'll get into this a bit. Is this interesting for you?
Yes. Yeah.
So before I'd gone to New York, Balanchine had come out with the New York City Ballet because they were doing annual summer seasons at the Greek Theater. When the Greek Theater was run by Jimmy Doolittle, he was a big ballet fanatic. He loved Mia Slavinska personally. They might have had an affair. But he was a big supporter of Balanchine bringing New York City Ballet out every summer. He brought out ABT, he brought out the Royal Danish. So as a young dancer in LA, I mean, the summer was great because we'd get all the major companies at the Greek, and then the Bolshoi with the Raven Fontaine would play the Shrine or the Hollywood Bowl. There was quite a lot going on. I mean, much more than now. I mean, now it's a desert, really. But it was quite a lot of good top-level ballet to see. It was cheaper to tour in those days. Now it's so expensive. Anyway, so Balanchine always wanted to have a ballet company in Los Angeles because he loved LA. When he was married to Vera Zarina, he lived in LA. He had a German Shepherd here. It's another story. And he just loved it. And so he wanted to be helpful. So Jimmy Doolittle, you know, wanted to help him. So they put together this idea to have a local Los Angeles ballet. The Music Center had just been built. This was around 1965. So there would be a place for a resident company, finally a major theater. And Balanchine's gimmick was brilliant because during the summer of, I think it was 65, during the New York City Ballet's 2-3 week run, he did, I think it was really a brilliant idea. He auditioned local dancers, you know, teenagers mostly, to do Serenade, to be performed within the program of the New York City Ballet at the Greek. So just that, so the whole program was Serenade to other ballets, but the Serenade that night would be all local Los Angeles dancers as the beginning of the Ballet of Los Angeles. So I went, I wasn't involved with anything there, but I went to see it, and it was beautiful. I mean, the girls did great, and the girl that did the lead was 17, Kevin O'Rourke, and she later became a dancer in my company. Long story. But that went very well. Then they did a performance at the Music Center, and the reviews were great. This was pre-Martin Bernheimer, pre-Siegel. The reviews were great. We'll get into that too. So there was support. You know, there was a good feeling about the whole thing. But Balanchine, of course, wasn't going to leave New York and move to LA. He had the New York City Ballet. So he gave basically Jimmy Doolittle the board of directors here. You know, I mean, on the Music Center performances, it was Paradis, Firebird, what was the other one? Raymonda, no, what was it? Paradis, Firebird, something else. Wait a minute. I didn't brush up on this. I didn't know what I was going to be talking about. But Maria Tallchief, who had also come from Los Angeles, did Firebird. Carol Scheimoff, who was a young girl from Los Angeles that had been in New York City Ballet briefly, did the lead in Paradis. Can't think what else was on the program. But anyway, it was a big success. So Balanchine said to the board, here, you have all these dancers, Jimmy Doolittle, you know, as your patron, the head of the board, etc. And he went back to New York. And then the board did the dumbest thing. They hired Eugene Loring to be the director. Now, Eugene Loring was a brilliant choreographer, you know, but he hated Balanchine. And Eugene Loring's idea of classical ballet was not from the old romantic, you know, imperial school, but a more drama Antony Tudor-based school, which is a completely different thing. And when Balanchine did the auditions for the first ballet of Los Angeles, for the Greek Theater Serenade, I was a student at Loring's school. And Balanchine rented the studios for rehearsals. And Loring was livid, but he needed the money for the studios. So, you know, there, you know, at certain hours would be all these beautiful, talented girls from Los Angeles and the Balanchine ballet mistress and people in rehearsing Serenade. So, of course, I was watching all this. And then every Saturday, Loring would do a 2-hour class for his scholarship students. I had a partial scholarship at Loring School. My scholarship meant that I had to clean the bathrooms and the mirrors because he wanted to discipline me, and I couldn't afford the classes, so that was fine. But he would harangue us for 2 hours every Saturday during the period of this bitching about Balanchine and how it's not classical and it's not. We heard this for 2 hours every Saturday. Like, okay, enough. We know you don't like him. It's, you know. So Balanchine goes back to New York. The board hires Loring. So immediately Loring kicked out all the Balanchine influence. and he made it kind of an offshoot of his American School of Dance. So he brought in Yvonne Mounsey and a couple of his teachers from American School of Dance to teach. He brought in Bella Lewitsky to have a modern class, and they were, that was going to be the repertory. It was going to be a Loring idea. And Balanchine was, a letter was written to him. His secretary told me about it. Basically, Eugene Loring wrote Balanchine, thanks, but no thanks. We don't need you now. We're fine. That didn't last very long. And during that period, I had gone to New York for my first time and was taking class at SAB. So when I came back to Los Angeles, if you can follow my logic here, when I came back to Los Angeles, Balanchine was out, Loring was in, but then right out. And I don't know what happened between him and the board, it just wasn't working. So at that point, the name was changed from Ballet of Los Angeles to Western Ballet Association. Loring was out. So Jimmy Doolittle had walked out. Of course, when they got rid of Balanchine, Doolittle said, well, that's the end of that. So it was basically the dress designer, Jean-Louis's wife, Maggie Louis, was running the company. And she, she meant well, but she's a patron. She's not an artistic director. But she was running the company. There was barely a board of directors. It was basically just her vanity show. They had written Balanchine to make peace with them, to try to bring him back in. So he was advising them, what teachers to use. And his favorite teacher in LA was Irina Kuzmovska. And he had used her as his teacher when he started the beginning of the company. And then she was relegated to one class a week by Loring. But then when Loring was out, then Irina, they brought back in, and she was teaching the majority of classes. Yvonne Mounsey was teaching, June Morris, who was still teaching. Bella had gone by that point. So I joined that group. I was 18, and I needed a job. They didn't pay very much, but it was something. And they were getting ready to put on a big program with a full symphony orchestra at the Scottish Rite Auditorium. But there's no pit, so the orchestra had to be behind the dancers, behind a scrim, which is a little awkward. And they made me a soloist right off the bat, and then I got to choreograph 2 ballets of my own, because they didn't have any repertory, really. But what they decided to do was, again, I thought it was crazy. They did full Act 3 of Sleeping Beauty. Now this is no real professional dancers in the company. I mean, a couple, but not really. Lace will feed. Their ballet master, they gave the title chef de ballet, is still a popular teacher, is Stefan Venta. That's where Stefan came into the picture. You're getting a full history. So Stefan came from Poland, and he was named chef de ballet, but he wasn't the artistic director. Maggie Louis was, no uncertain terms. And Stefan choreographed a couple ballets, one to the Mozart Jupiter Symphony, and I did the Fawn third movement. It was a nice solo for me. And then a really bizarre, communist-oriented Hindemith ballet about some dictator and a bunch of slaves. I mean, it was, somebody understood what that was. But Balanchine came back. Maggie Louis had made peace with Balanchine, and they invited him back. I'm getting to the point here. So they brought Balanchine back because they were doing Serenade. And he came in to watch it, and he liked it, and then he watched my 2 ballets. And then, maybe it wasn't politically correct, but in front of Maggie, and there were the board members there and everything, Balanchine advised them on what to do. And he said, for a young company, and again, ABT was coming regularly, still all the major companies were coming. He said, for a young company, why don't do the classics? Don't do Sleeping Beauty, don't do, Lace of Feet with young, because they can compare them to the major companies coming in with, stars. He said, do new ballets, modern choreography, do Stefan Venta's ballets, do Clifford's ballets, come up with your own profile, your own. He said, you can have all my ballets for free, whatever you want to do, but don't copy the majors doing Sleeping Beauty and so. And so I thought that was smart, because I knew I did Bluebird in that performance, but I knew we were out of our depth. I mean, I knew that we'd look silly, compared to ABT or the Royal, because the Royal Ballet used to come too. So anyway, so the Bolshoi was coming with Plesetskaya. I should talk more about her, but anyway, they went ahead with their plans, And after the rehearsal of my ballet, Barbara Horgan, who was Balanchine's secretary, she came up to me and she said, "John, why didn't you tell us you choreographed when you were at the school?" 6 months before that, I'd been to school for those months. And I said, "Well, nobody asked me." And there was no workshop in those days. There was no SAB workshop, which is a big deal now. But in those years, they didn't have that. And so I said, "Nobody asked me." She said, "Well, Balanchine would like you to come back and choreograph." And that's how it started. Not to come back and dance. But I got there, it's all right. I'll tell you a story about that later. But he was interested in me as a choreographer, and I went, oh, and being that I didn't want to do anything to make a living except dance, I said I can't afford, and the scholarship money they were paying the boys then was something like $80 a month, which you couldn't live on. And I said to her, I said, well, I can't